Welcome to This Day Live, the Sunday talk show, where we discuss all things political, bringing you the top stories locally, nationally, and from around the world. I'm Ruben Abati, and This Day Live begins now. I'd like to welcome today's panelists, Yemi Adamolekun, Executive Director in Office Enough, and Professor Bola Akintenuwa, Director General, Bolitag Center for International Diplomacy and Strategic Studies. Good to have you again this week. Let's start with the biggest news in town. Former Chief of Staff to President Muhammadu Buhari, Abba Kyari, died of complications of the coronavirus pandemic just 26 days after it was announced that he had tested positive to the virus. Now, the death of Abba Kyari, the Chief of Staff to President Muhammadu Buhari of Nigeria, has undoubtedly created a void in the upper echelons of the current administration. Based on the antecedents of some of President Buhari's closest associates, the next Chief of Staff to the President is likely to emerge from some notable public figures as the seat of power tries to get over the shocking demise of the former occupant of the office, Malam Abba Kyari. Well, I said the story of the passing of Malam Abba Kyari, Chief of Staff to the President, is, probably the biggest story in Nigeria at the moment. First, when the death was announced on Friday, and then the burial at Kudu Cemetery in Abuja on Saturday.
Yesterday.
Now, there have been tributes to him, and many of the tributes have been very positive. If you check this day on Sunday, particularly on pages 12 to 13, there have been very warm tributes from persons who knew him and who related with him in one capacity or the other. And then, of course, on the other side, there are those naysayers who have been complaining majorly on social media. But there is no doubt that everyone will remember that the late Chief of Staff, Abba Kyari, was a pillar of strength for the Buhari administration. He was a loyalist of the president, very hardworking, very dedicated. These are some of the things that the tributes that I have read have been saying, and that there is no doubt that he will be greatly missed, not just by the president, but the entire presidency itself. In his personal capacity, he was a very distinguished man, well-educated, highly intellectual, read sociology, read law, worked as a journalist, served also in banking, was commissioner at a time, so he had significant experience in public administration. He was self-effacing, he was very humble, and he was said to have been a very generous man by those who interacted with him. Let me start with you, Yemi.
My comments on his death or his person or?
Everything.
All of the above. Indeed, my condolences to his family. There was a picture I think I'd seen online that showed his wife, and I'm not sure if it was 4 kids or 2 sons and 2 wives or what the combination was, but my condolences to his family. And as you said, I am an Oxford alum, so as a Cambridge alum, I think that we have a connection.
Oxbridge solidarity.
Indeed. But I think, unfortunately, he was a man that I would say was quite misunderstood or unknown by Nigerians. The side that has been talked about, as you said, they are personal tributes, so they have the warmth and the love that one would expect from the Minister of Foreign Affairs, who speaks of him as the best man, Simon Kolawole at the back, who speaks of him as a friend as well.
Waziri Adio, the CEO of Neti
also.
Who also knew him personally.
Exactly.
And then another piece by Edozian. These are some of the ones that I have read.
in this day.
There will be more.
Indeed, there will be more. But I think what the consistency is what you've said about him being warm, obviously, and intellectual. But I think 2 things I'd like to point out around, okay, let me make that 3, around Mr. Kyari. One, as the heart of it is he was a socialist. So in 2015, 2016, modern day, it's a world view, and given where Nigeria is, that would butt heads with those who are probably leaning more towards capitalism. And that was a recurring sort of issue, I would say. Secondly, his relationship with the vice president. I think it's sort of public secret knowledge that there wasn't a good relationship in that regard. And I think with his, the sort of Nigerian phrasing of a cabal, the people who were in government versus the second in command, and the friction that brought in how governance in Nigeria is also an open secret. And then I would say lastly, his death. I think very unfortunately for him and for the likes of the governor of Bauchi State, who had been to high-risk countries, and by the time they arrived in Nigeria, flouted NCDC rules. By then, NCDC had given out guidelines that if you go to a high-risk country, you should go into immediate self-isolation for 2 weeks. And unfortunately, in that period, there was a Governors Forum meeting, there was FEC, there was NEC, and all of them were mixing, and we saw the effects of that. But not only that, in his burial yesterday as well, we also saw a government that, while making noise about social distancing, locking down a nation, had no problem showing on national, I mean, we're watching it now, showing on national TV, just gross, just flagrant disrespect for the guidelines that NCDC had put into place to protect Nigerians. And you see people there, some are not wearing masks, some are not wearing PPP. Then we saw the footage of the gentleman who buried him, who disposed of their PPP just on the public. Now, the FCT health authorities have come out to say they've been picked up and burnt and all of that. But the whole sequencing of not having a proper plan, social distancing, a plan on how to dispose of the garments, just shows a government that doesn't seem to understand the gravity. I mean, this is the death of someone who died from COVID-19. And in his burial, you can't even get your act together to even do it properly, to send a clear message to Nigerians that this is what we're dealing with. And for me, I think in both, as controversial as he was while he was alive, even his death has also been very controversial. But on the last point, sorry, and I'll end on that note, my heart goes out to President Buhari. I mean, for those who watch the show know that I'm not a huge fan. But I think in whatever way you dice it, it must be very, very, very disconcerting to lose someone who's been a pillar of your administration, who was an anchor in the middle of such a crisis.
He was in charge of the engine room.
Yeah,
and he was an efficient chief of staff.
And my heart does go out to him as he tries to replace him and find his bearing during this period.
We'll commiserate with him, Prof.
Indeed.
Some of the issues raised by Yemi, the presidency has tried to explain it. At first, yeah, there was a crowd there because the local people within the vicinity decided to join the funeral party, if I may use that phrase. And it's not as if everybody there was deliberately invited. And that in any case, it would have been very difficult to drive the people away. But some people insist that even in spite of that, it was as if government had to bend the rules and observe the protocols for burial of COVID-19 patients more in the breach.
Well, I have sympathy for President Muhammadu Buhari, not because Abba Kyari died. I have sympathy for him because he is a problem to himself.
Excuse me, I didn't get that.
The president is a problem unto himself. The meaning is simple. He cannot be self-contradicting at all times. You cannot be preaching the gospel of social distancing on the one hand, and then on the other hand, with your other right hand, you are encouraging what you are preaching against. It is just like Victor Wifo in one song. He says, "Do what I say, not what I do." Now this time you are telling us, please cooperate with us, respect social distancing, so as to be able to contain the spread of COVID-19. Now what I saw on the screen, the burial ground, what excuse is anybody going to give that there are some people who want to sympathize and you are unable to contain them? We saw them, no social distancing, one. people who even wear masks, all right, can be protected. Many were not. And I am saying that with the barrier itself, many people have been infected, bearing in mind the explanation given to everyone that you may not have symptoms, but you must have been infected. And without symptoms, you still infect others. You don't collect money from people to buy drugs, to buy equipment, all right, only to be dealing with the spreading. Now, the government is not in a position to say we have succeeded in containing so number of people. Even the data that we are talking about, to what extent will this be valid? So I have sympathy for him because on the one hand, he doesn't give us any impression that he understands what he wants to do. I give him active support by coming out with a policy of lockdown. But at the end of the day, everybody is making a mockery of the lockdown. Who actually is respecting?
But is it the president you will hold responsible for what happened at the gravesite yesterday, or the Center for Disease Control, which we were told, whose officials we were told supervise and oversaw the process?
I like that question. Who do you want me to hold responsible?
Because the president could not have gone there physically to go and be
You want me to hold the Minister
people.
of Health responsible? Why did the Minister of Health not provide for that?
Are you sure, he didn't?
Please, the statement made by the media advisors and assistants to Mr. President, they said they will inform the public about funeral arrangements.
Anyway, Prof,
and now
on that note, let's take a quick commercial break. When we return, the conversation will continue. It's still This Is The Live, the Sunday talk show. Don't go away. Welcome back to This Is The Live, the Sunday talk show here on the Arise News channel. Still with me in the studio, I have Yemi Adamolekun, Executive Director in Office Enough, and Professor Bola Akintenwa, Director General, Bolitag Center for International Diplomacy and Strategic Studies. Well, before we take the next subject, Prof, let's just spend a few more minutes on the subject of the passing of Malam Abba Kyari. And before we went on break, you were blaming President Buhari for what happened at the cemetery yesterday. And I was saying, no, you can't blame the president. The president was in the State House still mourning, and he cannot be responsible for the mismanagement of the rules of social distancing and other protocols. And talking about President Buhari, he has also paid tribute to his late chief of staff in the following words. He says, Malam Abba Kyari was the very best of us. He was made of the stuff that makes Nigeria great. One of those very warm tributes that I talked about at the beginning. So, Prof, back to you.
Tribute is one thing. The explanation I was trying to make was to simply draw attention to the fact that the whole essence of combating coronavirus has partly, if not essentially, mainly, all right, been compromised with the type of a funeral arrangement made. In other words, you want the chief of staff to help in fighting coronavirus. Himself, he was a victim. Who will say that he didn't know that he died of coronavirus? Now, I am making the point now that the mere fact that the federal government, the mere fact that the Minister of Health, the mere fact that the SGF, the chairman of the task force, all these people who appointed them, on whose behalf are they acting? They are all acting in the name and on behalf of President Muhammadu Buhari. So whatever they do, positively or negatively, if there's any act of remissness on their part, who should be blamed? It's Mr. President. In this case, they should have known that the man they are going to bury, all right, is a victim of coronavirus. And since there's a standing rule by the Center for Disease Control, they have the protocol, they have the regulations. Why is he that the protocol is not respected. So please, you see, I have always been arguing that we have a political governance predicated on self-deceit.
Indeed.
All right? And in this case, you cannot be implementing it, enforcing it on one side, then you now have this type of barrier, and you say the government can now bend the rule. Why should you bend the rule?
No, they didn't say bend the rule. To your point about Garba
It's the word you use.
No,
I
to your
did not
point
say
about,
they should
no, he
bend the
didn't.
rules.
Actually. To your point about Garba Shew's statement that they can't control the public, I think that's actually a very foolish statement, and I say that with all respect. Garba Shehu, as a SA media to Mr. President, is telling me that the former Chief of Staff of the Federal Republic of Nigeria will be buried with ministers in place, senior government officials at the place, and they cannot control a crowd? No, fine. Even if you want to put a barricade that the crowd cannot come beyond it, what about those officials who were there? Was it the crowd that was by the grave when it was being lowered?
Let's look to the future.
Let's be very clear.
Let's look to the future.
But if we don't accept where our shortcomings are, we cannot look to the future. Because this is a health crisis. And if the people who are in charge are supposed to be protecting the lives of Nigerians, are still speaking rubbish and trying to excuse a blatant violation of policies,
I don't
to the
future.
Abba Kyari is a good technocrat, he's a good person, we all know this. But what about the impact?
Let's look towards
the aftermath of his death.
Let's look towards the future. The review is useful, the tributes are relevant, but the big task before President Buhari now is finding a replacement for Malam Abba Kyari, somebody who will have his level of loyalty, discipline, and also intellectual heft. And in my view, such a person can come from any part of Nigeria. Such a person can come from any religion. Such a person can even come from diaspora. But at the end of the day, it will be President Buhari's choice. And when he makes that choice, we'll see. So let's go to the next topic. Still on the rise. The Nigeria Center for Disease Control, NCDC, confirmed 48 new COVID-19 cases in Nigeria. A breakdown of the cases shows 23 cases in Lagos, 12 in the Federal Capital Territory, 10 in Kano, 2 in Ogun State, and 1 in Oyo State. As at 10:40 p.m. yesterday, there were 541 confirmed cases of COVID-19 reported in Nigeria. The agency says 166 cases have been treated and discharged, with 19 deaths in the country. Meanwhile, the worldwide death toll from the novel coronavirus pandemic has risen above 160,600, with more than 2,334,000 declared cases in 193 countries and territories. Coronavirus. From the first index case in Nigeria on February 27, we have moved to 541. Last week, I think you were the one talking about Kano. You said Kano, because of its large population, should be a place that we should watch very closely. And your prediction, has been confirmed, because Kano State initially had 6 cases. That jumped to 21 as of 2 days ago. Now, as of this morning, 37 cases have been reported in Kano. Wow. And the numbers are likely to keep rising. And then in Lagos, Lagos now has 306 confirmed cases. Although out of the 306, quite a significant number, has been treated and discharged. And then in the FCT, we now have 81 cases. And, that's the picture of, the distribution in Nigeria out there. And then worldwide also, there's no indication that coronavirus is going down. But we're still a bit lucky in Nigeria. I don't know whether that word is appropriate. We've recorded just 19 deaths so far, which means there must be something that is being done in the isolation centers and in the various treatment centers that is still keeping the death rate quite low. Prof, let me start with
you. If you look at the report by the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, it says that in between now and December 2020, Africa is most likely to have 3.3 million deaths. 3.3 million deaths. And then have about 1.2 billion infections. The ratio of Nigeria was not given. I don't know yet. But if we expect to have worst scenario, the worst scenario, 1.2 billion infections. Then, best scenario, as the report put it, 300,000 dead and 122 million infections. Whether you want to use appropriate or luck or whatever, it simply means Africa is heading towards a trouble over which it may not have control. Now, the implication of that is this.
By the way, Prof, that's the global map of COVID-19 cases.
Now, globally, 2.3 million confirmed cases. That's worldwide. We should be more concerned about Africa first before coming to Nigeria. What they are saying in the United States, what they are saying in Europe, everywhere, from all statements, they are saying that Africa is the next target of coronavirus.
Target or epicenter?
Yes, I would like that word, epicenter. Now being the center of all these activities worldwide. When they refer to Africa being the next center, they are simply saying now that, okay, you've had thousands of people dying in the US, in Italy, in Spain. They are now implying that, okay, it is the turn of Africa. Because they say Africa, we are ill-prepared. We don't have all this, we don't have all that, we don't have the PPE, etc. This is the discussion. So I'm not looking at it that in the context of Nigeria, Nigeria is a country of some very hardened people, people who will not listen, people who will open their eyes and see, and yet be denying that coronavirus does not exist. So I'm afraid for our people in Nigeria, because the issue now is that they are now saying that even with the mask, wearing of masks, all those things, that does not necessarily prevent the spread of coronavirus. For now, the point you were making earlier on, when you are raising the issue at the level of Yemi, that we are probably lucky. The issue is that scientific reports are saying that our immune system appear to have been stronger than all others, resisting. Symptoms have not been coming out as quickly as possible, like it is with the pathogens of other people elsewhere. But now, it's a question of delay. We are already infected, and they have not been going out. So please, I think that the lesson we should draw from this is to ensure that we do not really have a special outbreak, quote and unquote. We are already facing the outbreak. But they are predicting a special outbreak in Nigeria, and this may worry.
Well, Yemi, what else should government do, apart from respecting its own guidelines?
Its own guidelines. A starting point for me will be state governors. State governors, I mean, we run a federation of sorts, and the state governors have responded quite differently. And I think a bit to Prof's point about level of taking it seriously. So last weekend, the big discussion was governors lifting their lockdowns for Jumat and Easter Sunday prayers. We've seen the Southwest governors issue a statement that they're locking their land borders so to prevent importation. We've seen places as far as Kaduna and Kano where their cases were imports from Lagos. They had imports from Lagos. Ekiti is just reporting a case of a woman, pregnant woman who came in from Lagos. So I think that a lot more communication needs to be done around the states.
Well, on that note, Yemi, let's take another quick break, and then when we return, this is Live, the Sunday talk show. We continue. Don't go away. Welcome back to This Day Live, the Sunday talk show, here on the Arise News Channel. Still with me in the studio, I have Yemi Adamolekun, Executive Director in Office Enough, and Professor Bola Akintenwa, Director General, Bolitag Center for International Diplomacy and Strategic Studies. Now, before we went on break, Yemi, you were talking about COVID-19 and the responsibility of state governments and the need for a better communication strategy.
Yes, indeed. And also I'm hoping again the past events of the last 48 hours will also reinforce to the governors, and as you said, the outbreak in Kano, the importance of the virus. Southwest governors in particular had a meeting last week Thursday. They issued a statement. They're closing their land borders because a lot of people are still being smuggled out. And again, just reinforcing that yes, it can be deadly, but it's a virus and people shouldn't be afraid to report themselves if they're feeling ill. As of Friday, April 24th, in all the 6 southwestern states, masks will be compulsory if you're going to go outside. And so there's an opportunity there business-wise. A lot of companies have opened their manufacturing lines to support masks to be giving out. I think in also addition to the people who are being smuggled, quote unquote, across borders, I'd like to particularly speak about security agencies. It's the military that borders these countries. And for people to go through and people are passing through, obviously a transaction of some sort is happening. I haven't seen any, but it goes without saying that if your job is to stop people from moving from one state to another and you let them move illegally, something happened. So I would really like to call on the police internally and the military guarding borders that we need to take this thing seriously. Even in Lagos, coming here, some police checkpoints, some of the police officers had masks, some didn't. And we need to be very conscious that if our security agencies start getting sick, all of us pay for it. And then secondly, private hospitals in Lagos have also come under a bit of a spotlight in the aftermath of 2 hospitals that have been closed based on their contact with COVID-19 patients. Again, for people who are feeling ill, please go through the appropriate channels. Don't put other hospitals at risk. And for staff in these hospitals, there's some conversation about maybe a whistleblowing fund or structure ideally your fear for your life should make you freely give up the information, but people have different considerations where they want to talk about illegal activity in their workplace. And that might be something the government needs to look into around protecting frontline workers, especially in private hospitals. And lastly, I would just like to add for religious leaders who continue to send out mixed messaging. I think it is extremely important if you're to be concerned about your members of your congregation, to encourage them to follow the law. Yes, it's inconvenient not to be able to come to church, but at least at the heart of it, we want to protect lives. And as long as the government is saying this is what we're doing, religious leaders have a responsibility to vocally support the government.
There's one footnote to your good points there as to what government can do. The private hospitals have drawn the attention of the federal government to the neglect of the private hospitals that, look, they've not been allowed to take active part, in the treatment of COVID-19 patients. They talked about the cooperation program between private hospitals, public hospitals, now coming together, but that the minister is not forthcoming. The minister has argued that private hospitals do not have the necessary facilities or the technical training, the cleaners who are supposed to have been trained in how to deal with infectious diseases. This factor is there. I think that the government should look into the legitimate complaints of the private sectors so that whatever will be required at their level, they can consider they can provide assistance, and then collectively, public and private, they can take a good look. Yes.
Well, another footnote here, you talked about the security officials who are supposed to enforce both the lockdown and also prevent interstate or interborder movement. Well, another thing, of course, that we should add to that is that they should exercise necessary restraint when they are engaging the public.
Thank you.
Because the DG of the Human Rights Commission, National Human Rights Commission, made the point 2 days ago, that's 2 days ago, more persons have died in the hands of law enforcement officers than from COVID-19. As at that time, the number of recorded deaths was about
22, I believe.
About 16 from COVID-19. And he said from security agents, we had a total of 18. Now, I saw a story. Femi Falana, SAN, says that, in fact, that figure that the DG of National Human Rights Commission is quoting is not correct. That actually law enforcement officers have killed up to 22. So this should not be an opportunity for extrajudicial killing on the part of our law enforcement officers who are helping.
You are right, but the general public itself needs more of public enlightenment. There's need for compliance.
Prof, you did this thing last week.
Yeah, because
you want to be justifying extrajudicial killing.
It's not, because you see, I am telling you that
Prof,
in
what we are condemning is extrajudicial killing.
No,
you cannot
that's why
justify
it's
it in
different.
any way.
That's why it's different. In Sabo bus stop, in front of the police station there, in front of a Total petrol station, I was driving behind one vehicle. The policeman flagged the private person, even well-suited, well-learned. He didn't stop. By the time he gave the impression as if he was to stop, he just drove away.
Yeah,
if it were
we understand that, but
Yeah,
we're
so
saying
we need-
don't bring it up when
Prof.
we talk about extrajudicial killing, because it sounds like you're justifying
We don't
it.
No,
have
it's
more
not
time.
justified, but,
We don't have more time. We need to take another
Yes.
topic. And this has to do with President Donald Trump of the United States, who has come under heavy criticism for putting countless lives at risk when he announced that the United States is freezing payments to the World Health Organization over its handling of the coronavirus pandemic. The U.S. president said on Tuesday that funding will be on hold for 60 to 90 days, pending a review of the World Health Organization's warnings about the coronavirus and China. He accused the global body of severely mismanaging and covering up the threat, even though it declared a public health emergency on January 30. The U.S. is the worst affected country in the world in terms of infection numbers, with more than 600,000 cases and 26,000 deaths.
With the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, we have deep concerns whether America's generosity has been put to the best use possible. The WHO's attack on travel restrictions put political correctness above life-saving measures. Had the WHO done its job to get medical experts into China to objectively assess the situation on the ground and to call out China's lack of transparency, the outbreak could have been contained at its source with very little death, and certainly very little death by comparison. This would have saved thousands of lives and avoided worldwide economic damage. Instead, the WHO willingly took China's assurances to face value, and they took it just at face value, and defended the actions of the Chinese government, even praising China for its so-called transparency. I don't think so. The plans to reopen the country are close to being finalized, and we will soon be sharing details and new guidelines with everybody. I will be speaking to all 50 governors very shortly.
Well, basically, I mean, the United States, or President Trump says the WHO mismanaged the process, did not act quickly enough, and has been covering up for China. And in fact, he's supported by House Republicans, and the 17 Republicans signed a petition or a letter saying that they support the decision of President Trump with regard to WHO, and that the condition that he should give is that the WHO Director General, Tedros Ghebreyesus, must resign. But of course, the WHO has 194 member states. Other world leaders are not supporting Trump, even if he has the support of Republicans. And the WHO says it has remained faithful to his mandate to be an international health policy organization, particularly with regard to infectious diseases, and that it will not get involved in politics. The only problem here is that the U.S. is the biggest donor and contributor to WHO. Between 2018 and 2019, the USA alone contributed about $893 million in terms of dues and also in terms of donation, followed about half of that coming from the United Kingdom, was the number 2 biggest donor. But of course, needs assessment contributions constitute just a third of the funding for WHO. But, Yemi, what do you think? This, is this part of, power rivalry that Professor Akintola is writing about today in his column in This Day. That's power rivalry between China and the U.S.
Possibly, but I think more is just let's talk about lives. I think I believe the WHO did make errors in the initial stages and how they communicated, but I think their pronouncements were supported by Trump. I think at the early stages, Trump was praising China about how they're dealing with it, honesty, cooperation, and all of that. And I think the point that I like that another media platform made very strongly is that regardless of what the WHO was telling you, that America has probably the richest information network in the world, that you had access to reports even before the WHO started talking about it. So Trump as president of America, so if we're now zeroing in on how America has been hit by this thing, I think President Trump fails to take responsibility for what he is responsible for. And this is not the time. So because he was siding with China, number one. Number two, all the reports he had available to him, he didn't.
Well, we'll take number 3 when we come back from the break. It's time for another break here on This Day Live, the Sunday Talk Show. We'll be right back. Welcome back to This Day Live, the Sunday Talk Show here on the Arise News Channel. Still with me in the studio, I have Yemi Adamolekun, Executive Director, Enough is Enough, and Professor Bola Akintola, Director General, Bolitag Center for International Diplomacy and Strategic Studies. Before we went on break, we were discussing the decision of President Trump to suspend further funding for WHO. And you had made 2 points. You were going to make a third point.
Yeah, just basically that he's passing the buck, the things that are his responsibility as president of America that he did not do, reports that he had access to that he didn't pay attention to, and the structure that President Obama had put together at the time of the Ebola that he completely tore apart. Obamacare, and that is now the results that we see in the number of deaths and America's response to the pandemic. But I just wanted to parallel that to Nigeria as well, that if leaders don't take responsibility when they should and respond appropriately, it does come back to bite. And even if you have a problem with WHO and what they did, is it in the middle of a pandemic that you want to stop funding and start doing an audit where there's still lives to be saved? And
that's the position of the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres. He says, look, even if there are issues with the WHO, this is not the time when the world is in the middle of a pandemic. But Yemi evaded that question about power rivalry.
No, I was leaving it to Prof.
And you wrote about that today. Is this an aspect of the China-US rivalry, or we're dealing with something else?
You cannot even understand the power rivalry if you do not factor in United States' attitudinal disposition in international relations on things like this. When the UN was established, the United States used to account for 48% of the assessed due of the United Nations. All right? But for reasons of U.S. foreign policy interest, that percentage, 48, had to be reduced from 48 to 40 to 38 to 35 to 30 to 25 and eventually to about 20%. So the UN is funded to the tune of about 20% as of today. We are not even talking about WHO, the other agencies.
U.S. funds WHO to the tune of 15%.
The United States, whenever is no longer succeeding in getting any agency of the UN, any international organization, to get its foreign policy interests protected, this is the instrument of foreign policy that they normally do. They not only threaten, they always withdraw. The first time on record was the case of UNESCO. Ntambao was then the Secretary General. They refused. The United States brought the United Kingdom to join in withholding funds. So it is not new. The United States, when it's not succeeding with its foreign policy, is coming with this type of policy. Withdraw from climate change, Paris Agreement, withdraw from all. So it is not new. And we are not surprised. But what has always happened is that in this particular case, the moment the United States is withdrawing, other countries are eager to provide, and that's where the power rivalry comes in. For instance, now, the United Kingdom has offered 65 million pounds sterling. All right? Ireland has talked about 4 times its contribution, bringing that. And I can tell you that any second from now, the Chinese are always looking for this type of loopholes. Where the Americans are exiting, they are just coming in.
As they did in Africa. Let's take one more topic and then we'll call it a day. Earlier in the week, 14 persons died in a fire outbreak at an internally displaced persons camp in Ngala local government area of Borno State, Nigeria. The fire, which reportedly broke out around 2:15 p.m. on Thursday, burned down 1,250 houses to ashes, killing 14 people, with 15 persons sustaining various degrees of injury. Recall that days after days earlier, a building housing the Corporate Affairs Commission, and also before then, the office of the Accountant General in Abuja were also engulfed in flames. Another fire incident occurred at the Independent National Electoral Commission headquarters in Maitama, Abuja. According to reports, the section affected was the election party monitoring office near the media center. We keep having these fire incidents one after the other. If it is not gas explosion in Abula Ado in Lagos, it will be a fire incident at Dugbe-Alawo in Ibadan, or fire at Balogun Market. And then in recent times, we've been having government offices, the Corporate Affairs Commission, the Office of the Accountant General, INEC office, and then in IDP camp. Now, this is not the only IDP camp that had been razed to the ground. 5 days earlier, 5 days before that of Ngala, there was another fire incident in another IDP camp. Yemi, what are we dealing with here?
It's enough, not enough this time.
I honestly really don't know, to be quite frank. I really don't know what to make of it. I mean, for government offices, it's always a conspiracy around what documents are we trying to burn. But in these cases, it hasn't quite tallied up. So quite honestly, I really don't know. I really
Prof?
don't have any.
There is a lot to say. Go back to the 6th floor of a defense building, Tafawa Balewa. Initially, it is always the Department of Accounts, all right, that has always got burned. Go to Ministry of External Affairs when it was in Kakawa. When you go back down the memory lane, you will discover that other departments, other floors, the fire will never start from there. It's always from the accounting department. But now, we are no longer talking about accounting department. They are always talking about where you have strategic documents. And we will be told that, okay, look, when it was a Treasury building, a journalist asked, what about these COVID-19 donations? Are they secure? And then, why should a journalist ask that if it was not because of what we were used to? And then government had to explain.
In any case, the Accountant General will not keep cash in the office.
Well, look, the issue is not even the physical money. But when you don't have documentary evidences to suggest that you even have XY amount of money, what are you going to be asking? The point I'm trying to make now is that, okay, we have shifted from accounting departments to the issue of whether we should not be holding the Nigerian Society of Engineers, those who are approving, giving credence to builders, construction. Why is it that, for instance, we do not have anti-fire blocks? Why is it that every time we are faced with this type of challenge, and especially government buildings? No, something must be wrong. What is it that our architects, our builders, those in the construction building, why are they not?
Well, in the case of the IDP camps, the problem was that they did not have fire service support.
Yeah.
Because, you know, these IDP camps, that some of them are in remote places. So there was no way help could come. They were just struggling on their own. And these are mostly women, children, and the elderly.
And also you have dry,
but,
and you have dry things. So.
I'm happy you wouldn't have forgotten here on this platform the market in Lagos.
Balogun Market.
Balogun Market. We had someone using pail, using hand, all right, to fetch water.
But to your point about buildings, I think one of the things maybe we don't learn from is sort of proper auditing. I mean, one of the common causes of fire in Nigeria are ACs and power surges. And I think, and that's a sort of, I'm not quite sure what, in terms of the discourse, so there are also sort of gadgets around monitoring what sort of voltage goes into, blah, blah, blah. But I think if proper audits are done and we understand why, that might help. And part of your point about building is also poor electrical materials that are used.
With regard to the
available.
IDP camp in Ngala local government in Borno State, the president has ordered an investigation, and he has also directed the Minister of Humanitarian Affairs to ensure support and assistance for the affected persons.
Whenever we were confronted with this type of fire challenge, had there not been any order from the president investigating? We have always been having all this. Now, why is it that every time...
Well, on that note,
you see,
we'll have to end the show and wait till next week for the discussion to continue. You've been watching This Day Live, the Sunday talk show here on Arise News. I'm Ruben Abati. From my entire team here in Lagos, it's bye for now, and thank you very much for watching. See you next Sunday.